All right. Welcome, Eduardo. So we are so fortunate to have a dear friend, Eduardo Rincon, with us today. He's a teacher and researcher and an artist, and he graduated as a tropical plant biologist working in plant ecology research in the University of Mexico, and then later obtained a Master of Fine Arts degree based on Gertrude phenomenology and how to merge science and art. And in the 90s, he founded a garden, La Huerta De Vinci, a biodynamic garden dedicated to teaching sustainable practices and producing medicinal plants and medicine and practicing the biodynamic principles. And recently, he's been fusing his personal research in plant biology and biodynamics to do really cool art installations and paintings and sculpture. So we're excited to have his experience in merging those fields, the book of nature and the book of man. And currently, I believe he's living in San Miguel de Allende, where he's founding a biodynamic learning center. Are you now in Dornoch full time? Yeah. So he's had a bit of an upset since I last saw him in California. We met at the Greenwood gathering that we put on there, and lots of things have changed since then, and we'll definitely get into that in a moment. But welcome, Eduardo. And I'd like to begin just with asking, like, how did you begin working with the land? Where is that inception?
Well, I would like to thank everybody who invited me here. It's almost unbelievable for me to be here sharing the stage with Dennis, who I've always admired and who has been my teacher for many years. And I think this idea of get big or get out is now still working, but it's becoming different because becoming big doesn't mean big in money or in, let's say, corporate language. It's becoming big in your heart, big in your actions, big in your consciousness. And
Thanks.
I think one of the most beautiful teachings of Dennis is that he is a master uh, in humility. And he brings the most huge images of the cosmos and the earth into a simple offering that is always available for anybody who wants to step into biodynamics or alchemy or any of the areas where he has developed such wisdom. And he shares it with us in such a loving way that it becomes an inspiration. He has inspired so many people around the world. And I am very, very thankful. And I feel very lucky to be in this panel, sharing with my teacher and my brothers like Matthias and Danilo and others who have been in this path together. So yes, it's quite striking what's happening in the world, and especially to me, I've been invited ever since maybe a year and a half to be the co-leader of the section of agriculture at the Goetheanum. So I moved here last August with my family, and now we are fully working in biodynamics from the Goetheanum. So it's quite something for me too. So it's beautiful to now connect back to what they call here in Europe, the West, which is the Americas. It's nice to be from this angle of reality, looking back at where I started. So thank you so much. I started in this path with my brother. We always liked to explore. We were very eager to explore our surroundings. And my dad was traveling around Mexico building schools for the government, and we would always explore. We would always collect insects. We would always climb the trees and the little hills in front of our house. So we were explorers ever since that. And that was my first connection to the land. And I, of course, became fully in love with nature. And it was later in my life that I came to the realization that it was full of doors. It was full of windows to gaze into the other realities, and that this seduction of nature had to be transformed into knowledge, into higher understanding. And so after that, my dad bought a farm. Actually, it was not a farm, it was a ranch. It was a cattle ranch. And as you know, in the semi-desert farmland, they have to be large because you don't have a lot of green for the cattle. So these ranches are big. And my brother and I used to go horseback and go around the whole farm and exploring. And in that farm, there was many things. It was a big, sorry, ranch, and there was an old pyramid. And we would always think, what were the people that lived in this pyramid doing? And we would imagine them in those prairies doing things. And then later, this was developed into a archaeological site, and it turned out to be one of the northernmost archaeological sites in the region of that region of Mexico, and it was completely designed for cosmic, well, for star wisdom. It was beautiful, as the archaeologists there told me. This is a whole archaeological site designed to speak to the gods and saying, we know, uh, and we want you to know that we know we are connected. So we build this in precision about all of the let's say archaeological buildings were aligned with the cosmos. So it's a dialogue of saying we are here, noticing that you are there.
Right.
So that was my first connection, this farm and working with the cattle and exploring this beautiful place. And then I went into organic first and then biodynamics. But that was, I guess, my first connection.
Yeah, beautiful. What an amazing experience to have that connection to the past in such a real felt way and a
Yes.
discovered way. Yeah, wonderful. Also, well, tell us about that transition into biodynamics then. So you're on this ranch. Was
Yeah.
it there that you discovered it, or how did you come into that?
No, when I was there, I was very, very young, very little. I was 7, 8, 9, up until more or less 12. And then we moved to the city, and we would only go to the ranch on the weekends. And then I became really close to nature, and we did an expedition to some islands in Mexico, and there I had a revelation. I found the skeleton of a whale in the beach, on the beach, and this completely transformed. And I said, where is this coming from? What is this? What is life, etc. I asked these questions, and that moved me into biology. So I started biology because I was having a few, let's say, disagreements with my dad. My dad was farming already in a different farm now, doing conventional agriculture, and I was having a bit of unrestful feeling about that. So I decided not to go into agriculture. I went into biology, and then I studied plant biology, as you said. And then I started producing my own plants. I started farming. I started moving into medicine because I worked with a friend who now has a biodynamic farm in Mexico too. And we started doing medicine for his practice. And then I started growing these plants, but I was doing that organically. And then as an amateur, I planted a whole pack of lettuces. And so I had 400 lettuces in 1 week to get rid of. And my
Oh,
friend said, you
jeez.
don't want any more. So I went to sell them in this place where they told me this is a very strange school called the Waldorf School, and they might like your lettuces. So I put a little table outside the door. I put my lettuces there. And then the third grade teacher came to me and said, would you teach biodynamic agriculture to my students? And I said, sure, but I don't know what that is. And she gave me the book. And I said, yeah,
Wow.
no problem. And,
No
and then
problem.
a few years after that, we found out about Dennis, and my friend and I traveled to California, and we drove from San Francisco all the way to Vancouver visiting farms. And that time I didn't find Dennis, but I did find some of his work and his books. And then I just had a turnover in my life and said, whoa, what is this? I need to know about it. And that's how I started.
Wonderful. Yeah. It's always that book, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Jack, can you do this? Oh, hilarious.
Yeah.
So interesting that your father was doing agriculture and then you kind of in rejection of that style. Do you have a
Mhm.
relationship to the traditional agriculture in Mexico? That is there a relationship that you see as biodynamics and traditional agriculture?
Yes, of course. When I finished high school, I had about a year, or more like 7 months of free time between one schedule and the next one. And I took a trip to Palenque in the peninsula of Yucatan, where there's the Mayan culture is still thriving and strong. And I went there to work with an archaeologist, and he was absolutely in love with astronomy. And so he taught me Mayan astronomy, and we would look at the stars. And that's when I got really into it. And I thought, wow, this calendar work that they did in these indigenous places of Mexico was so powerful. There's archaeological sites devoted to calendar work. And it was through the calendar that I started really understanding ancient practices and ancient ways of looking at the sky. And then my question became, is this still relevant for us? And I thought, okay, so the sky has changed? No. The stars? No. The wisdom, it's still there, but it's transformed. What has to change is the human way. What we, us humans today, are looking at, gazing at the stars, understanding the calendar. We need to go to a higher level. And now that we have a conference, which I hope you can join online, starting on the 5th of February to the 8th, called the Earth as a Living Being. And I think that is what our ancestors wouldn't have a doubt about. I have a friend from Colombia who said he gave some preparation, some biodynamic preps to an indigenous tribe in the Amazon. And he went to visit and say, how are you doing with the preps? Are they working? And the guy looked at him and say, can't you see it? Can't you feel it? And he was like, oh, sorry. Yeah, of course. So they're still connected in many ways. But all of us
Yeah.
in the world have detached from the profound connection that we had to nature because we had to become free. So we're all trying to move back into that, and we cannot move in the same way. We have to do it through understanding. We have to do it through thinking. We have to elevate our thinking to a next level. And this is something that is beautiful about Dennis's teachings, because it is not enough now to go into the forest and say, this is beautiful, I love it, I'm so connected to nature. That's just a door. And if we don't will our thoughts into opening that door and changing our paradigms about it, we will remain in the awe of nature, which is the first thing that we get, which is very important, but we have to move to the next level. So I think to really perceive the earth as a living being, we have to do a lot of homework, and that has to do with our thinking and with many other things that are uh, important for us to tap into it. It's not enough to be in awe. It's a beautiful start, but we need to move forward.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, Steiner had this idea that those who work the land are need to become the new priesthood. That seems to be a like that next step of guiding. Could you say more about how that, what your thoughts are with that idea?
Yes, it's very beautiful because the ancient sorcerers, the ancient governors were also the poets, and they were the inspired ones, and they were doing the calendars, and they were also the priests. So it was all united in this group of people who had the initiation and who had the ability in that time to think consciously. Now it's not like that. We think in a way almost in a grant. We are granted that since very young, but now we have to elevate that thinking into conscious thinking. And but it's interesting because thinking of that, now that we finished 100 years of our biodynamic movement, and we have been thinking about what can we bring to the future, what is needed for the future. And of course, it's all of what I've just talked about, moving from the conscious soul to the rational soul to the conscious soul, but also we have to look at the things we are doing and find new ways of moving it to the future. And I think one of the gestures that is important is if we can recognize that the work of the farmer is profoundly centered in that healing, that moving of, let's say, the compost is like the altar, if we want to see it like that. And the preps are part of that holy substance that will heal us and heal the earth. So that task of the farmer is impressively important. I would say it's the central importance, and that is a priesthood. But surrounding the farm, especially nowadays, is the economy. There's education, there's medicines, there are other tasks. So we cannot do our task properly as farmers if we are not sustained by a community. And that community has to do with trading, has to do with consumers, with media, with many things. So in order for the farmer to really do its task, he has to create or have the ability to create communities that withstand all of the process and let him do this
Right.
priest with a group of people. So the priesthood is now shared. I cannot become that if you don't do your part in helping me move these products. So we have the resources to have a healthy economy in our farms, etc.
Right.
And today this is being challenged, especially in Europe. It's really, really a challenge nowadays. So the future has to do also with communities, with the ability to create places where things work in order to do that priesthood and in order to do that the altar and the temple of the earth can become that. So that's my one of my thoughts nowadays.
Yeah. Would you say more about what is being challenged in Europe?
Well, if you look at the news, all of it was really interesting because on the centennial of the biodynamic movement or of the bringing of the course by Rudolf Steiner last year in February, just a few weeks before that, there were protests, right? There were all kinds of protests. The farmers were protesting, were blocking
Right.
highways, going into cities. Of course, there's a lot of mixed things in there. There's also the conventional farmers wanting to still have a lot of benefits from good prices for the agrochemicals. That is also in the picture. But what is really difficult is now it's becoming here in Europe so bureaucratic to farm. You have to fill in forms. You have to, I mean, it's even the attack at the priesthood that should be happening is even more clever, let's say from a materialistic
Right.
intelligence attacking and saying, oh, you want to do this? Well, you have to fill in this form and then you have to comply to this and you're going to be registered and then you're going to be supervised and inspected. And so the
Right.
protest had to do with that also, to say this is we cannot farm anymore. This is ridiculous. And then the profits and the margins are ridiculous. We're so
Right.
far away from what Rudolf Steiner brought as true price. And as our dear friend Christopher Hutton brought also about now he's with the idea of true trading. What does trading really mean
Mhm.
in a healthy economy like Steiner brought in the economics conference? So I think part of the protests have to do with that. In certain countries like France, there's direct attacks on farming. There's
Yeah.
some countries, also France and Spain and other countries, are banning biodynamic, I mean, sorry, yeah, not biodynamic, but medicine, anthroposophical medicine is being banned in
Right.
France. Homeopathy is being attacked, anthroposophy is being attacked. So it's not easy. They really, in Europe, are now looking to other countries, to other continents as hope for the future
Yeah.
because the warmth is there. I attended a conference 2 weeks, no, a week ago, and it was very misty in the night. It was really closed. And then I walked near to the Gotianum on the path that some of you may know, which is facing the west. The whole Gotianum is looking at the west. west of Greenwich, let's say. So that's us in America, in the Americas. And it was very cloudy. You could barely see the building, but the big glass, the stained glass, where is depicted what many believe to be Michael or the Christ, was still visible. It was really dim. And I thought, that is the warmth that needs to come from the Americas back to the Goetheanum to rekindle something that is being attacked and suffering from so much rational and materialistic ideas and attacks. And of course, this is happening in the Americas too, but in many places of the world, in Asia and Australia and Africa and Latin America, there is a lot of really intense work and moving forward in a beautiful, harmonious, and fraternity way. So
Yeah.
that's very hopeful. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you think it has something to do with the age, with the time that's passed since those ideas took foundation? Because I know my research in the educational field and technology has seen that some of these anthroposophical ideas are arriving at the governmental level, and they're having to come into contact with, as you said, the bureaucracy of that. Is it the age thing? And is this the evolution of these ideas that it needs to learn to interface with that more bureaucratic system? Or do we need to go back to some of those kind of grassroots, if you will, to bring that revitalization?
Hmm. Well, it's a breathing process. I think we can really benefit from what has happened in Europe. I am experiencing that myself. There's so much that has been done here. There's so many books. There's so much beautiful work that has happened for years. I was
Yeah.
just in a cathedral in France, and the first part of that cathedral was built in the year 290.
Wow.
290, almost
Yeah.
2000 or 1900 years ago. So that's the depth of what has happened here. There has
Yeah.
been things going on, but now it has to breathe with the, let's say, the new world, what they call the new world. It has to become a breathing. So it's not, let's say, going back to grassroots, it's metamorphosizing. We have to do a metamorphosis of what we are, who we are. And one of the things that I have experienced here is that you become uprooted, right? Like a tree. And when that happens, you notice that what is quality in your life is that you become a human. You belong to a region, but the
Yeah.
challenge is how can I become human where I am not necessarily, I was born in a particular place for a reason to bring and to help in some direction, but how can we move to become really human? Because that is what will help us through these tremendous times ahead to become human in reality. And that is a little bit far away from where we come from. It
Yeah.
helps where you come from and where you can bring, but now we have to do a metamorphosis of that into our new being. We have to transform ourselves.
Yeah, in a way, bringing home inside of us. You know, I've read you use this term, the planting in the soil of the heart, and that idea kind of having our inner world alive. But I know the work that you're now able to do is, in a way, bringing these ideas. Could you say more about what you mean with that phrase, planting in the soil of the heart?
Well, that's actually not mine. I think it's a metaphor that has been used many times, but I would highlight that it is really in the Christmas conference that is really profoundly broad. So in the Christmas conference, which is there were so many things happening. Of course, it's a profoundly esoteric moment for anthroposophy, one of the, or I would say the most important moment where things really are set for the future. And there, Rudolf Steiner, let's say, plants the foundation stone in our hearts. But what's really interesting is, and those of us who work with seeds know that sometimes you plant it and the conditions are not there for it to germinate, right? And so after 100 years, we may ask ourselves in a personal way, because this cannot be answered by anybody else, but saying, what have I done with that? And it wasn't planted in the hearts of the 800 members who were at the Christmas conference. It was planted in humanity for all humans. So,
Mhm.
what are the conditions that we need to have in our heart? And that was said by Dennis so beautifully. We need warmth to begin with, right? But we also need humus that is becoming human, which is the root of humans,
Right.
human. So we
Right.
need to build our humus in our heart for that seed to be there. We have to bring our abstract thoughts and warm our heart with that to become in a fraternity of free spirits working together. It almost is like paradoxical. How can you be a free spirit and work together with others? Well, if you recognize in the other that he is also free spirit and belongs to the spirit, then we're brothers, and then we're allowing ourselves to be free because we
Mhm.
trust that the other person is connected to the same spirit. So if we see this image of have the opportunity to germinate that in me and make it uh, alive, and that's the challenge that we have now. And then we all have different tasks depending on where we live, on our biographies. It is different for everyone. And it is interesting because one of the most striking things that happens when you read the agriculture course and you don't come from a four season place, it is striking. Or when you come from the south of the equator, you're like, well, that doesn't happen here. So that's the first task that Rudolf Steiner gives us when we read this. It's, well, this is not a fixed path. It is alive. And the question for my friends that live in the equator is, well, they always raise their hand and say, Eduardo, we don't have seasons. And I said, really? Do the frogs mate uh, all year round?
Right.
Are the migrations of birds always the same? Does it rain all year? There's a different process. There's a different breathing. There's a different gesture. So when you think about this idea of doing it from a personal, what is personal in your work in biodynamics? The first question is, well, I come from this place, and how can I connect to the idea of the course in my place? How does that look?
Mhm.
How does that look to me? What gestures are there in my land? And then it becomes personal. And then you stop repeating the course as if it was a fixed thing, but you make it alive and you take that into your soul as also a process of germinating in
Yeah.
you to say, well, for me in this region of the world, this is how it works. And that is, I think, also the beauty of the work of Dennis, because he also shows us how in a space, a small space, you have all the cosmos working there. You are able to spray a bed and see the results. And
Yeah.
of course, some of us are working in hectares, hundreds, etc., are working in movements that are global. But the idea that you can work in a garden, relate to the hierarchies, work with the spirit, experiment, and also another beautiful gesture by Dennis is that we are all doing research. We go to our farms every morning, we look at the landscape through our senses, and we make decisions. I think we need to water. I think we have a problem with infesting of insects, etc. We are constantly challenged by making decisions. So
Mhm.
we have the potential of becoming researchers, and that's what I really think is one of the other underlying ideas about the agriculture course. It's an invitation to do your own research.
Yeah. Yeah. And even in a way, I would posit that maybe your art is a form of that research too, because it's developing that perception. Would you say more about how your art is informed by biodynamics and how your biodynamics is informed by your art?
Yes, yes, thank you. Well, I come from a family of artists. My mom is an artist and my great grandfather was an artist. So for us, drawing at home was like, eating. My mom would say, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you draw it? So this is how
Wow.
we were brought up, like, this is not understandable. Make a drawing, and then, oh, this is what I mean. Oh, okay, now I understand. So
That's
that
great.
language was there for us. And so when I started getting into trouble with science, I had a beautiful moment one time. I was doing I was collecting data in 2 hectares of land in the forest, in the tropical forest. And if you've been there, you know that 2 hectares in the tropical forest is quite something. It's so full of vegetation and dangerous animals. And so moving 10 meters sometimes can be challenging. So I was working there and I was by myself, which I shouldn't do because there's tremendous snakes there and there always have to be 2 people. But that day I was alone and I started hearing an animal move in my direction. It was the dry season when it rains less in the tropical forest. So the leaves were crumbly in the floor. And so I started listening to a running animal going in my direction. And I stopped and I said, whoa, what is this? And then it looked at me. It was, I don't know how to say it in English. It's a serete. It's like a big rodent, really big rodent that's in the tropical forest. And the precious moment was when he looked at me and I looked at him and we connected. There was something I couldn't explain. I thought, wow, what was that all about? And then I started commenting, I started saying this to my fellow scientists and friends, and they didn't connect. They said, "Oh, come on, we're just here to do research, collect data, find patterns and statistical analysis, and make conclusions about nature. This is what we do here." And I thought, no, 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 I don't come here to do that. No, it's not possible. And I started really feeling terribly lonely and confronted with the idea that I'm not going to find the answers to my questions through the pure science. And I started drawing naturally. I thought, wow, I have to draw. And I started painting. And that was my escape for that. I started connecting to nature through art and trying to understand my questions through art. And this became a habit in my life. And I think you can do it through poetry. I think you can do it through dancing. I think you can do it through literature. I mean, we are all artists. So that was for me the language. I found this and I felt really good. I thought, okay, this is an amazing way of dealing with the wall of material understanding of the scientific world. And I was doing actually something, I was studying the distribution of ferns in the ground. And at some point, I was taking photos of the canopy and making measurements and things. And I thought, all of these tools that I have are not really saying what I'm feeling. This is not the way. So I had a tremendous crisis. And it was through art that I could start doing research. So now I still use it. Whenever I hit a wall in my rational thinking, I go to art and I find this, or I go to a poem and yes, there's a beautiful set of uh, thoughts about what is poetry by Ferlinghetti, one of the famous poets from City Lights in San Francisco, and he has a set of aphorisms about what is poetry, and in one of them he says, "Poetry is the language of the heart." It's what the brain cannot say and the heart can say through poetry. So it fits so well. It's just such a balm to your life to find art and use art for your research and for your everyday work.
Yeah, I think that's, I had the benefit of a Waldorf education, and I feel like that really it changes the way you perceive the world because you can see, even from eurythmy, I see a bird fly and there's a gesture from eurythmy that I see, and it speaks in a way that's not just a wing movement, but there's like an underlying meaning to that movement. And I think the artistic expression there is an opportunity to bring it out of your own soul. I've often defined art as a reflection of reality through someone else's soul or through one's own soul.
Mm.
And in the in the garden, even, the arrangement of the plants, the rock in that place, like Dennis was speaking to earlier. To me, that's an important part of biodynamics as well, because it's, what is the phrase? As is the garden, so is the gardener, or vice
Mhm.
versa. I can't remember.
Yeah.
That cultivation of that feeling life feels like an important part of biodynamics as well. But to not go so deep that we lose connection with that scientific part. Do you see a way of balancing those that keeps us in the middle?
Yes, I think we have to reconcile with science after reading and going deep into, let's say, spiritual science. You have a tendency by natural occurrence to say, oh, well, that's bad and that's not reality. Reality is something else. And even Steiner said many times, science is incredibly accurate at describing the physical world. And when we read the first tablet that Steiner brought for the first class, and he says this, man, know thyself. What he what is implied in that is you know yourself. You look at yourself in the mirror. You say, I am this, but that is just part of the reality. So when you fully know yourself is when you go across the threshold and see yourself from the threshold to the earth and say, okay, so I am made up of much more than just a physical reality.
Right.
Then you complete the full image what a human is, and then you can say, I am a full human being because I know that I have both parts. So in understanding reality and understanding, for example, in some of the work on composting, it is very good when you're dialoguing with the owner of the farm as a consultant and saying, let's do analysis of the compost. Let's see how many bacteria are there, how many
Right.
mycorrhiza, let's see what elements are there. And this immediately brings an image to an owner that's seeking, do we have enough nitrogen for our crops, which are nitrogen,
Right.
right? But that's just a beautiful introduction. Yes, look at what we have here and what we're putting in the ground. But then there's so much more. And Dennis just brought it in a small video today. There are ways of knowing that you are also dialoguing with much more than just the physical reality of the soil or of the plants. You're making a dialogue with something bigger that is not present to the naked eye.
Mhm.
And so I think science is beautiful. And math, I mean, you are able to know that there's a black hole in the universe, not because you see it, but because you see the behavior of all the things that are around it in terms
Right.
of gravity. And you can even, in a beautifully elegant way, make a theorem about it and explain it mathematically. It should be there because of the behavior of everything around it. And that's so beautiful. And science can be in this way incredibly elegant. And some of the best researchers in non-tangible science are very elegant and are very rigorous scientists. So we can really learn a lot from the rigor of science. We can really understand how to move because in an occult science, Steiner brings this and saying this is a science because there is a mood in the scientist that we need to learn from. We cannot fight against it.
Yeah.
What scientist doing when he's asking a question? And what mood arises in me that is scientific? And now let's take it to another realm. Let's grow it into something that is expansive and can explain much more than just a physical reality. So definitely we have to reconcile. We have to become a rigorous scientist. Not everybody in the farm can go every day, take measurements, make observations, write it in a log, and understand it. Only a few can do that.
Right.
And those have an inclination for that. That which Mendel and so many scientists around the world have developed so beautifully. The patience, the rigor, the observation. And in farms, there are people that have those qualities.
Yeah. Yeah, that brings it back to your point about the community around it.
Hmm.
And I was doing some research on things you've been working on, and there's a program training the trainers
Yeah.
that you've been working about, and you talked about doing this biodynamic learning center. What sort of principles and practices are you using to help people bring both that Hartgemut, the art side, as well as the scientific rigor?
Well, I must say that I am not directly involved in it because when I was, let's say, the president of the Biodynamic Association in Mexico, this was not directly my task. This was the task of Vincent Gertz, who was working with other leaders in the South America and Central America. So I am very aware of it, but I didn't lead it directly. This has to
Gotcha.
be clear. But what is really beautiful about this is that it has allowed so many things to happen. First of all, is the collaboration between countries. There are 10 countries in Latin America working in this program. There's, I think, more than 140 students learning, training to be the trainers, and there's amazing teachers. And so it is really an example of how to work into the future. People traveling from Argentina to Colombia, people, teachers, and everything. It's like a melt pot of beauty and love and knowledge. And it really is producing some really amazing results. Now it's going into its third year, and it's being supported by the section. And I hope we have a submission for support for this, and I hope it goes through. And we will continue because this is what gives meaning to what the movement is about. And what's really amazing, this is happening in the tropics. It's happening south of the equator. It's happening in desert places. It's happening in tropical places. So it really is a melt pot of amazing knowledge. And we feel very happy that there are so many people involved, seriously doing biodynamics and bringing it to their different communities. So it's a really beautiful program. And in terms of my training center, well, that's that is in the refrigerator because I'm now here. So
Yeah.
my center changed a little bit. It's become a little bit bigger, but I'm doing my work from here now.
Yeah. So that's exciting. So the real thing, one of the things that Dennis and I had talked about is the idea of bringing, as you mentioned earlier, these biodynamic principles to environments beyond which it was originally thought for.
Yeah.
And, in a desert environment, you don't necessarily have equisetum growing around, right? It's loves this moist environment to be growing in.
Mhm.
What are some of the things you're seeing that new research that's coming out of these sorts of interactions, or maybe what have you done in your farm that kind of deviates a bit from what you would say is that fixed idea around those first print preps?
Yeah. Well, those are areas that are very important, but they're also sensible in a way that a little bit like what the picture of Dennis brought at the beginning. We have hardcore science on one say and saying whatever doesn't go into a statistic analysis and is proved to be right, it's not reality. And on the other spectrum, other side of the spectrum, you have I just I just have a vibe that this plant can be like equisetum and I love it and it works nice. And so that's where research comes in. And it's not easy because ideally, it would be nice if you can work with new preps, let's say, once you've understood and used the original preps and see and study them profoundly.
Right.
Then you may be able to suggest, let's look at what happens in the tropics or the deserts or south of the equator and can be worked on. That is my belief that that needs research, that needs to be looked at seriously. It has to be studied, it has to be uh, repeated, and serious information has to come there to be able to say, I think we have something here. And that unfortunately is not easy for certain countries that can have the flowers, can't have the preps. But we're finding ways of doing that. And there is already research going on different streams. I want to say that this year, on the first days of September, we have our Biodynamic Research Conference. It's a world conference that will happen. And I'd love to share this with you because we have a call for contributions for research. And in that spectrum of every idea that's happening in the world, we have those working with new preps, doing research, showing papers and results from their work. And we have the studies of the preps. It's a beautiful opportunity. And this year it will happen in England, which is very significant, at least for me, because that's one of the places where science really got
Right.
strong in the world with many of the people we know. So I think research is the solution for those questions. Serious
Yeah.
research, loving but profound.
Yeah. Taking that rigor of the early days. Yeah. So
Mhm.
you now are in this unique position to be able to see across the world really and be a focal point for a lot of the work that's happening. It's my understanding that a part of what brought you here was your experience in the Americas. What do you see as some of the new possibilities with your position now in as a section leader?
Well, those things are revealed in drops. It's not like a huge wave of, at least for me. So I'm really creating the space to be able to perceive that. But I think it's already showing up. I think it has to do with warmth, with what we in the Americas and in other parts of the world already have developed in our hearts, and that should be brought here to complement the rational thinking and sometimes the harshness of bringing things, which is also interesting and beautiful, but it has to be warm. So part of my task, I think, has to do with that. I also think that it is important to raise your hand and say, not everything, not everywhere in the world, there's four seasons. When you see this idea of the snow and I had my first experience with a snowfall here. It's just so beautiful, so silent, so poetic.
Yeah.
It's like a poem that moves into the soil of the earth. And I experienced that for the first time, but you don't have that in many regions of the world. So can we become sensitive to how the spirit is manifesting in different parts of the world? That's part of my task too. What does it feel to be south of the equator? How are those rhythms understood? Because I don't believe that the spiritual world distinguishes between north and south. There is a
Right.
stream of something happening in a particular part of the year that is valid for all of the world. But how do we see that when we're in the south?
Yeah.
And those are some of the ideas that I'm working on. And also in the section, we are now we have the work for the next 3 years has to do with rethinking biodynamic agriculture, re-feeling biodynamic agriculture, and re-willing. So it's not about
Yeah.
creating something completely different for the next 100 years. It's looking at what we have done and how can we take it to the next level in a more profound way. Can we establish that new gestures that the world needs? The world is saying something to us. Can we develop ourselves to that level where we can bring back what has been given to us in a new rethinking, rewilling, and refeeling way?
Yeah. Beautiful. Because we are in a different consciousness now.
Yes.
It's 100 years. A lot has changed. And in what way do you see the sort of acceleration in the of consciousness with the interaction with technology? Are there ways that you're thinking about trying to connect with people that use those as means of communication, or is it that's kind of verboten?
No, 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 no. I think it's amazing. It is just it gives us a big opportunity, and we're not even talking of AI, but that is also the thing. I think the main question for me is the distractions, the attack on the eye is more clever, more sophisticated, and more addictive. So screens and all of those things, we may spend 3 hours looking at spiritual videos, right? What is that
Yeah.
really doing? It's feeding our ego, which is the lowest part of our eye. And so I think part of what we need to keep conscious when we're working with technology is, how do I protect my eye being? How do I allow the highest part of me to help me in my consciousness? Because your consciousness has to connect to your higher being. So if it's there, then you yourself provide the answers to the questions of your biography and your life and your interaction. So the real question is, how do I become human? How do I connect profoundly with my I being, and how do I protect that? How do I create environments in my work to really do that? And it's not enough to work in nature anymore. We have to come profoundly into the task and elevate our thoughts to the next level. And so I'm all in favor of working with technology. I wouldn't be here with you if it wasn't for it. But how
Yeah.
do I find space in my day to become connected with my I being, and not let the distractions that are cleverly designed to move us away from that to affect you to in a profound way? Only it's a personal answer, and that has to do with the personal relationship that we create in biodynamics. We also have to create a personal relationship with technology,
Yeah.
and, and find the right amount.
Yeah. And do you see a place in the garden for these technologies? I know we're getting more and more mechanized with some of these massive agricultural industries. Is there things that are happening in that realm that, maybe like Dennis said, gratitude for the tractor is a starting point,
Yeah.
but is there a relationship we can build to those types of beings that can help bring this consciousness into that level as well?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that when you think that in matter there are spirits trapped at the service of humans, to be able to be aware of that, I think everything, computers are full of elemental beings trapped in metals and in aluminum and rare earths and so many things. I think if we look at the world in reverence, and that's one of the beauties of indigenous cultures that we can learn from there, because they've been able to sustain the reverence, the respect, and the connection with the earth for centuries and millennia. And so we can learn from that when you see a farmer in the Mayan world that before entering his plot, he thanks the universe, he thanks the elements,
Mm.
he asks permission to plow.
Wow.
That's simple. It's simple, but you can do that with everything that surrounds you, like Dennis was saying. How can we not thank for this technology, all the beings involved in it, humans and non-humans? But it's a question of not being trapped. It's just so easy to get trapped through the screens and to become robotic, and that's away from being human. So
Yeah, so we can be that yeast in a way to maintain that connection. Yeah, beautiful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Eduardo. This has been really wonderful to hear your thoughts on these. You mentioned two different events. There's this event coming up in February, and
yes.
then the one in September. Would you say the titles and the dates again, and where we might find
Yes.
those?
Yes, maybe I'll share the right information with you so you can properly share it with everybody that's
That would
attending
be
the
great. Yeah.
or the website. But yes, we have our biodynamic conference from the 5th to the 8th of February coming up. And it's beautiful because it has to do with the rhythm of the year, and it's always forgotten. It's in Candlemas, really. And that's beautiful because for farmers, it's a very significant, especially the farmers here. It was when the light of the sun was coming again. So it's really beautiful that the conference happens during or right after Candlemas. And that's you can see that in the section for agriculture in the website for the section of agriculture in many languages, Spanish, English, French, German. And there you have the precise dates. And then also there it will be advertised the Biodynamic Research Conference, which will happen in England this year at a very important agriculture university in England from, I think it starts from the 1st or 2nd of September for 4 days. It goes on. You can visit the website of the section of agriculture, or we can share it through wherever you tell me it's important to share it. It
Yeah, I'll
would be nice
collect those
to have
links.
contributions from all fields.
Wonderful, wonderful. And last, is there any place online that we can see your artwork or anything like that?
Well, the problem with the website is not starting it, but it's feeding it, keeping it alive. So I do have a website. It hasn't been visited by me for many, many years, and it has my name, eduardorincon.com, .co.
Excellent.
So, but that has not been updated for centuries, but you can see a little bit of what I do there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's always wonderful to just get a flavor of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Eduardo, and
You
your
guys,
work across the world. It's really we're so grateful for it. And unfortunately, Eduardo, it's late for you, so we won't be joining us for the panel. But again, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
thank you. It's very beautiful to be participating with you and with Dennis. It's almost it also brings tears to my eyes to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, wow, so much richness from these folks sharing their perspectives. Um, we are going to take a break now. So walk around, put our feet in the grass, and then we'll start back at the top of the hour at in just a half an hour with Danilo from Costa Rica. He's going to be sharing with us a little bit about the experience of being a biodynamic farmer in the tropics and kind of the things that Eduardo was talking about. How do we deal with the seasons? How do we connect to our traditional agricultural practices in a given area? So stick around and we'll be back in a half an hour.